this is Mark Goldberg with the UN Affairs blog, UN Dispatch.
And it's Matthew Lee, Inner City Press, from within the United Nations.
So Matthew, the big news, at least here in Washington, is the vice presidential nominee for the Republican Party, Sarah Palin, will be visiting the United Nations next week for the UN summit. Is the halls a flutter there?
I would say that's yesterday's news here, Mark. No, but it was.
Okay.
No, I'm sorry. I don't mean to say it was yesterday. There's been a lot of fluttering. In fact, I actually think it was 2 days ago's news. It began on Tuesday. Tuesday, I heard she's coming. It's still, to tell you the truth, it's pretty much totally confirmed she's going to come to this anti-Iran rally.
Yes.
I think whether she will actually come inside the United Nations or not is still not clear. And people have asked the spokespeople here, and it's sort of to do that, I guess she'd have to be made part of the U.S. delegation, right?
Right.
George Pataki has done it, so they could easily, obviously, they could do it. But that definitely has been, at least among the press, that's been a big buzz. I mean, there are, just so you know, there are other problems going on in the world other than Sarah Palin.
I need the TikTok of
for the Anglo
campaign
press
and election coverage.
Yeah, not just for the U.S., even the UK press. Yeah. Even the UK
Plaza,
press.
Yeah.
I think one of the issues is also like, I'm sure, given that she's coming to New York, that they're trying to set up meetings for her with like Sarkozy, Gordon Brown. The question will they do it?
Yeah, well,
my guess is,
I never thought about that. That's funny. I always thought of the McCain campaign is saying they're doing this to expose her to world leaders. It'll be a good opportunity for her to meet and greet and talk to some people. But I never actually thought about whether or not the world leader would actually want to meet her.
I bet my guess, sort of deep. If you can gauge anything by these the French the mission spokespeople, that they're highly bemused and probably wouldn't want to do it. At the same time, if they didn't do it and McCain and Palin were elected, then they'd look bad. So I think that it's interesting. I think.
Well, I can tell you, sir. I can tell you one country that will likely not be willing to meet Sarah Palin.
Iran.
One head of state. Well, Iran, sure, but news this week here. We're recording this on Thursday in Washington. Is McCain really seriously snubbed Spanish President Zapatero? Mm-hmm. When he, in an interview with a Spanish television station, said that he wouldn't want to invite Zapatero to the White House. Now, their confusion arose as to whether or not McCain sort of understood the question. Apparently, it was asked in a pretty heavy accent, but that confusion was quickly put to rest when the McCain campaign put out a statement saying that, of course, McCain knows who Zapatero is. And he will not invite him to the White House.
And why not? Go ahead. Here's one where I'm
to me, that's that's the kind of the weird question.
For pulling troops out of Iraq after
so Zapatero came to power on a promise of withdrawing troops from Iraq.
Sure.
In something was like 2005.
This is right after the bombing.
Yeah, right after the bombing.
Come on, he had an.
No, sorry, 2004, right after the bombing, and made good on that promise. However, Spain is a NATO ally, and Spain has something like 750 troops in Afghanistan. So, not a negligible amount of troops. I
find that is a very strange. I'll try to look into it. There's actually. I can tell you this, knowing the Spanish reporters here, there's a flurry in the Spanish press today about how, even before this snub that I hadn't known about till you told me, how light Zapatero's schedule is in his trip to New York. There's sort of no agenda, few bilaterals,
to meet Sarah
mostly
Palin.
tapas. Yeah, he's got a lot of time. There's a lot of tapas
somehow
going on.
I don't think that's happening. But yeah, it's sort of the news today, Thursday. I don't know if it's going to percolate up to the mainstream media, but
I'm going to do my best to be a bridge, Mark. I'm going to be a bridge on this one.
Okay.
Because Zapatero is a huge. Spain is definitely under his tutelage is a big UN supporter. I mean, they've given a lot of money. They're definitely trying to get posts all the time.
Yeah.
Maybe, so it's. But I don't think that's why McCain. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
Maybe it was a slip of the tongue, and then he had to justify it.
The thing is, that was so when watching this interview, that's the impression you get that McCain just somehow got confused, or the guy the interviewer had a heavy accent, so he made it sort of a comment that seemed to say that that seemed to sort of confuse Zapatero with unfriendly Latin American leaders.
Right,
now,
right,
that's excusable.
Hugo Zapatero, right?
Well, that's excusable because, again, it's like a little hard to follow the interviewer, but and so everyone was kind of willing to write it off as just a little bit of a gaffe. But then campaign spokesman sent out a statement, reiterating McCain's sort of hardline anti-Spain stance.
Hugo Zapatero, right?
Yeah.
Maybe
it
was
weird. It was kind of it's a curious development, I'd say.
There was a Palin, or at least Alaska, event here in New York this week, to which I went. There was the opening of Alaska House, which doubles as an art center. It's in Soho, but also is the state's economic embassy to New York.
The Alaska Economic Embassy to New York.
That's correct. The promotion for the event was that Sarah Palin would be there. Obviously, since she was tapped to be the running mate, she dropped out. But in fact, going down there was almost no Alaskans at all. It was a bunch of hipsters and filmmakers and fundraisers.
So wait, you went down there? You wanted to?
I did go down. I went looking, believe it, just as a matter of news, looking for sort of like, so what do Alaskans in New York think of Sarah Palin?
Yeah, are they like other New Yorkers in New York?
Yeah, no, actually, a number of them said that her running is good for the state of Alaska. The few Alaskans that I met said her running is good for the state of Alaska, but they personally are not going to vote for her. And that she's a crazy Christian. These are quotes. I got these quotes from people. But here's the irony: is that the Alaska House benefits from an earmark from Congress, FYI, which is why we're calling it the bridge to somewhere. So there is some non-UN news out there.
All right.
But actually, this may get us into the thick of what's happening right now.
Go for it.
Maybe McCain mistook Zapatero for Father Miguel de Soto Brockman, who was the Nicaraguan ex-foreign minister of Nicaragua under the Sandinistas, who was elected, slipped in, and I think when you think it through, he's now the president of the General Assembly for this year. He had his opening was this week, and he opened big time. This guy, I don't want to say he knocked it out of the park. Maybe he didn't, but he opened big. He gave a very long speech in the opening session of this General Assembly. It's not what everyone's calling the General Assembly that's next week is actually the general debate, right? They'll have Bush, Ahmadinejad, Evo Morales, but the actual session of the General Assembly began this week on Tuesday, and Father Miguel, or Brockman as they call him, maybe de Soto, who's he was with the Sandinistas. He was a big deal in during the Sandinista Revolution.
Yeah.
He delivered a blistering speech against. It appeared to be against superpowers, but it was pretty much against the U.S. Yeah. And it said there are countries that are addicted to war. He talked about Iraq. He was asked at his press conference, what about Russia and Georgia? Was that an act of aggression? And he played with his hearing aid, and then he said, I didn't hear you correctly. Did you mean Georgia invading South Ossetia? That was an act of aggression. Next question. So he's quite a showman,
This guy. Never a dull moment for you, Matthew.
Afterwards, somebody said to me, this guy is great. He's always on the side of the underdog. And actually, now you're going to be, I'm not so sure. I think you see what I'm saying? Like, for example, he hasn't been asked, like, what does he think of Chechnya? What does he think of Tibet? I sort of think he's taking his marching orders from which is fine, but it's just kind of weird because it's very refreshing. Many people that I know
from where is he taking his marching orders?
I think Moscow. I think he was. I mean, I've articulated for our blogging head viewers the Russian position on Georgia and Abkhazia.
Yeah.
But as the president of the GA to be so wildly one-sided. I mean, wildly, really. There's not even a country on the Security Council that takes the position that, that it was purely Georgian aggression or that Russia's response was totally reasonable.
Yeah.
They're alone in that. They and Brockman. And in fact, interestingly enough, Nicaragua is the one country other than Russia that's recognized so far Abkhazia and South Ossetia. So I don't want to say he's taking orders. Maybe that's how he thinks. Maybe it's just force of habit. But I think. Again, and Khalilzad, the American ambassador, was asked today what he thought of the speech, and he was very diplomatic as usual.
Yeah.
But he said, what somebody said actually, back to your favorite, or at least in your dreams, John Bolton. Bolton would have been like outside this guy's press conference, ready to he would have done a stakeout and said, "The guy, this is an outrage," and call the police. But
quick question: what are sort of the actual responsibilities and duties of the President of the General Assembly?
Good question.
What does the office do?
Good question. The strangest thing about the office I'll hold to last, but the duties are few. It doesn't even really cast a tie-breaking vote. It convenes things. This is what's Khalilzad's point actually. The GA president is supposed to be a mediator. It's supposed to make sure that the world community works together. Often, like Sirjan Karim, the outgoing from the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, otherwise known as FYROM, a proud Macedonian that he is, or Macedonian.
Yeah.
His main claim to fame was that he tried to bring about Security Council reform. So he never even said what his position on it was, but he brought the parties together. He kept them working. You talk about climate change a lot. The biggest irony of the post is as follows. You're not paid by the UN. The President of the General Assembly is, on paper, the highest official of the UN. He's actually above the Secretary General or anyone else.
Okay.
Right? Because this is the main body, and he's the president of it.
Yeah.
But in fact, almost always it's a diplomat from a country, and the country is supposed to pay their living expenses and salary.
But they always would, because generally, isn't typically the President of the General Assembly, correct me if I'm wrong, the UN ambassador from that country?
No, it's usually somebody a little bit higher. It usually will be like the foreign minister,
an
ex-foreign minister. Yeah, it's usually an ex-foreign minister, someone along that lines.
Okay.
So, I mean, and the thing is that you couldn't serve at the same time as president of the GA and as ambassador of your country, right? So even if you had previously been working as the ambassador, it's still an extra post. His point, what we found out about Sirjan Karim is that, in fact, unlike most other presidents of the General Assembly, he hadn't been. Although he had once served as the foreign minister of FYROM, he, in the time before he was selected, was working for a media company called WAZ, W-A-Z, Media, which owns stations throughout the Balkans, and now in Vietnam they're investing. Yeah. And in fact, during his time as president of the GA, he was paid by a private corporation. Yes, you heard it correctly. He was not only not paid by the UN, he was in the pay of a private corporation. Now, their claim was that this never presented a conflict of interest because it was a media company. But it seems pretty dicey.
Like how could a president of a General Assembly sort of wield influence? Not wield influence. Or what sort of decisions?
My thing would be what if he worked for Lockheed Martin, the military contractor? Then he became the head of the General Assembly. I mean, clearly, as the president of the General Assembly, you're also the head of its committees. One of the committees of which is the Fifth Committee, which sets the UN budget, and which can absolutely intervene,
that's an important
ask for investigations on contracts. That's probably the most important thing. You can also, I mean, you have a certain bully pulpit to say, there should be a moratorium on the death penalty. But in terms of actually steering money, you can do it, which is why having the position funded by a private corporation is, in my humble view, an outrage. And Karim actually, toward the end of his, he would never say how much he got. I'll say it here, $400,000 a year. However, and I don't mean to drop my voice, maybe that's not that outrageous, it caused a certain stir in FYROM, because it's pretty much more than anyone there yet.
Yeah.
But
so say he was the outlier, he's getting paid by this media company. Is it, I don't see sort of a philosophical problem of having the President of the General Assembly sort of as a post essentially being seconded from their home country and being paid for by their home country. I don't see. I mean, no. I mean, what they're not supposed to.
You don't.
No, I mean they're diplomats. First and foremost.
So they can take but during the year that the president of the GA, they're supposed to be working for the world community as a whole, not for their country. I understand. I guess what you're saying is that if you doubt their impartiality on this, why not on everything else?
Right. Again, but I think a lot of times presidents of the General Assembly, right, are not from countries that wield a tremendous amount of
they could be one of the people
on the international stage. I guess it depends on how you measure influence. But you can take here's an example: Jan Eliasson.
Yep.
Right. He's a former foreign minister of Sweden, who was the president of the General Assembly in 2005, and actually I think did a pretty good job considering the very difficult circumstances surrounding the 2005 big reform debate. And you don't sort of I don't assume he stops being Swedish as soon as he becomes a
I guess I'm just talking
president.
Structurally. It seems like it'd be like, for example, why not then have the president of the United States paid by their state instead of by federal taxes, right? It's no conflict,
I think our federal structure is fundamentally different than sort of the UN. The UN is not like a federation of states,
It's an international organization made up of states. Why not have, for example, if you're the head of the World Health Organization, you're paid by WHO. You're not paid by your country. I'm just saying. I'm not saying it's a no-brainer. I guess all I'm saying is that I see the UN waste, and maybe we'll do battle on this one. I see enough waste in the UN that this is one on which I say it would be a good use of money. Just like public, financing of campaigns, it would be a good use of money. And although you can say, maybe, I think that the dangers posed and it's totally unregulated. I.e., this gentleman, Mr. Karim, did not have to disclose who was being paid for. You could be paid for by another country. For example, I don't want to go into what the investigation of the current presidency will find, but what if you were paid not by your country but by another country? What if Russia and the U.S. bid for your services? You see what I mean? There has to be some control over how the president of the GA is paid, because otherwise...
Does this happen, though? It seems a little far-fetched.
Why couldn't it?
I will get good, but it just seems like
there are a number
totally far-fetched.
Ready? There are a number... Mr. Just go to Brockman, who I like enormously, and I don't know that well, but he's come in, he's brought a new energy. He's brought a whole little staff with him from Nicaragua. Are they all paid for by Nicaragua? Now, maybe Nicaragua can do it. Maybe they can't. Can Nehru do it? If you want to say that all countries are equal, then it seems each country has a different ability to pay. And you don't just pay for the president. You're paying for his senior advisor, his chief of staff. Do you see what I mean?
Sure.
No. I'm surprised you're not then fighting for a small country. Should a small country be precluded from putting forward a candidate for president of the GA because their budget actually doesn't allow them to pay 5 people to work not for their country but for the world as a whole? Would it be absurd to ask Nehru to pay for 5 well-funded New York apartments so that they could serve their turn as head of the GA?
How about this for a reform proposal? The staff of the GA president becomes sort of permanent UN Secretariat staff.
Oh, so you can get him in through the back door?
What's that?
Rich?
That the staff is sort of, these are sort of, the chief of staff of the president of the General Assembly is a permanent, is just a regular UN employee. They're the chief of staff for
but that would be the thing.
And,
but even the president of the GA.
Presumably, you want folks to bring in their own people. They can bring in their own people, but the actual staff would be would be sort of UN members of the UN Secretariat.
Right.
Sort of that. I'm trying to think of sort of parallel examples, and where sort of the corporate head switches, but the sort of staff remains.
No, sure, almost like civil servant. No, and they are
like
the spokesman.
Exactly.
Right, the spokesman for this guy is work for the. No, but I guess here I'm gonna. Then we can move on. But I'm gonna make I'll try. Here's the easiest proposals. I think it's pretty much of a no-brainer to say there should be disclosure how these people are paid. You might think it's unlikely that a country would pay someone else's national to be president of the GA. I don't think it's necessarily impossible. But I do know that the only way to know if that's taking place is to say, this most important post, there needs to be disclosure of how you're getting paid, right?
Sure. All right.
Just during the year. Okay, we can,
we can. I think we're getting in the weeds, but...
We're getting into those weeds. But the weeds are, I'm telling you, whatever. Here's some breaking news for you. Are you ready?
Do tell.
Well, the scuttlebutt began earlier this week that with the pending request for an arrest warrant of Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir, that France and the UK have reached out with a set of conditions which, if met, would result in them being willing to freeze the indictment of Omar al-Bashir.
Okay. What are these conditions?
I can actually, rather than say sources, although I heard it from others, I will actually, on the record, source it to a person I'm sure that you know, is Gareth Evans of the International Crisis Group.
A well-respected and...
highly respected, former foreigner.
He is the guy who essentially wrote the Responsibility to Protect doctrine.
And now he's written a book, which can be purchased from the Brookings Institution. A copy of which I have somewhere in these packs of papers. But he said that they were doing it. And so yesterday, directly from his event pitching his book, I went and asked the French ambassador, Jean-Maurice Ripert, is it true that you're speaking with Sudan about dropping the indictment?
Yeah.
Sorry about the phone.
Évidemment.
And he said, he launched into a long explanation. He said, well, this would of course require many things. It would require them to stop killing people in Darfur. Sorry again for the ringing phone on this important topic. It would require them to allow the deployment of a MINUAT, he called it, UNAMID, to the rest of us. it would require them to begin proceedings against the two indictees, not necessarily to turn them over, but to begin proceedings against the Kushaib and the other guy, Haroon, in a way that the ICC could live with. And then he said, okay, then the follow-up was, if they do those things, would you freeze the indictment? And his answer was, why not?
Yeah.
Okay.
So what did Gareth Evans say?
Oh, Gareth Evans said that both countries are talking talking to Sudan about this.
He didn't sort of offer his opinion.
He did offer his opinion. He said that there's no reason to believe that if the pressure of the threat of indictment was going to make him act better, he already would, and he's not acting better. But he also came out against applying RTP to Sudan. He definitely did. He said that the balance of consequences. He said the consequences of trying to go in without the government's consent would confine 2.5 million people to no humanitarian aid and would destroy the CPA deal between the North and the South. And so he's against it. And he wrote the book.
He wrote
right?
Listen, I trust his judgment.
He literally.
Although I'd argue that the CPA is pretty much already.
If you're a fan of Salva Kiir and of the South Sudanese, here's two things they've done. We'll go. This is not
let's finish this thread though, because this is kind of interesting. So
so he said that, and so this was immediately myself and a colleague. We were like, there we go. There's this. You said the story of the day was Palin, but this was the story.
Yeah, the story and this happened today, Thursday. Your conversation.
This happened yesterday. Yesterday he said this, and so
interesting. Go on.
Yeah, stories went out. In fact, even after he said why not, a French spokesperson who must remain unnamed came and tried to spin us that he hadn't said that. But of course he had said it, and he said it on camera. That's what he said.
I guess, in our conversations, I think that that I feel that the ICC's power is political primarily. Right. That if it can induce this kind of positive behavior on the part of Bashir, all power to it. I guess maybe my only concern, I feel like I've said this before, is I would prefer the indictment to happen before...
The arrest warrant to be issued.
Yeah, I would prefer maybe the arrest warrant to be issued before any deal is struck. It's probably also important to note that the Security Council can't just it can waive the indictment for a period of a year at a time.
Sure.
So there's always the opportunity, if Bashir remains intransigent, to reapply the warrant.
Right. I just
think a warrant maybe is a little more of a stick. At the same time,
when you get down to the details of it, I wonder whether, from Sudan's point, of course not to speak for Sudan, but here's the reality is if an arrest warrant were issued and then the Security Council were to somehow freeze the execution of the warrant, it's such a sword. Meaning, like, for example, one of the other accused now in the custody of the ICC, Jean-Pierre Bemba from the Congo.
Yeah.
He was tooling around in Brussels without a care in the world, and then he was arrested and sent to The Hague. And so the idea is that then Bashir, the idea becomes anytime you can be arrested. If they froze it before the arrest warrant is issued, he would at least have some notice. You could still do it.
At the same time, the ICC has the power to use sealed indictments anyway.
Right.
Which is
but
how
if the
they
Security
nabbed Charles
Council
Taylor
votes. Right, exactly.
In Liberia. So, I guess the point is you shouldn't commit war
crimes. But isn't Charles Taylor, isn't he under the jurisdiction of a different court?
He is. He is under the jurisdiction of what's called the Special Court for Sierra Leone.
Correct.
But like the Special Court for Sierra Leone and like the Yugoslav and Rwanda courts, the ICC has the ability to issue sealed indictments.
Right, but not if the Security Council has voted in an open session under Article 16 to freeze it. I'm not saying. I'm just saying. I'm sure Sudan is aware of the difference between the two, and there is a difference. There is a difference, and I think it's less like. Who knows?
So this is actually really. I think this is really important sort of development.
Very important point.
Because this whole time I've been sort of very pro ICC action on Sudan, precisely because I think it adds an additional point of leverage over Sudan, and a point of leverage that really didn't exist by the international community in the past. So, if Bashir can be induced to making these concessions and to being more cooperative on sort of the deployment of UNIMIT to Darfur, and also his obligations under the Comprehensive Peace Accord between the North and the South, I'm all for it. At the same time, color me very skeptical that every time that Bashir has made sort of a move to be a little more conciliatory towards the international community. He has sort of played them like a fiddle.
Right.
So,
but the story goes on. I wish it was. If this was a story, then it would be. I'm going to call you even more skeptical, because once having said why not and pretty much confirmed what France is doing, today in front of the Security Council, as we were, covering a meeting on the Middle East, the French said he wants to speak again. He's forgotten to say something. The scuttlebutt was that Mr. Ripert of France had gotten some heat from Paris overnight about saying why not. And so he came to the stakeout again, and he said some prepared remarks. That if the vote were to come up today, France would not vote to freeze any indictment. Which is fine.
Play hardball. Play hardball.
Yeah, exactly. They went there. But then we went back into it. But didn't you yesterday say why not? He said he did say it. Then he tried to say, so he sort of, it was a very strange clarification. It was a clarification that left things even murkier than they were.
Okay.
But it showed that it goes back to this idea that it is of course controversial for them to come out and say if these conditions were met, right? And the thing here's the strangest thing, and I actually did ask him about this today. He said one of the conditions is that Sudan begins proceedings against its two current indictees, already with arrest warrants, Haroun and Kushib, in a way that the ICC can live with.
Right.
The ICC agrees with. And it's something that we've talked about before, but it actually that got lost in the weeds. And it's this. The prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, Luis Moreno Ocampo, was quoted and has not denied saying the moment about a couple months ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, that Sudan said it was appointing a new special investigator for Darfur. He immediately was quoted saying it's not credible, it's a joke. All they're going to do is to prosecute.
Right, but it's not up to Ocampo, the prosecutor, to judge whether the sort of what the judicial standards of the proceeding are. It's up to a separate organ of the court. It's up to the court's judges, their registry it's called, to decide whether or not the standards of what they call complementarity are met. Whether or not like a trial can be pursued under fair conditions.
Let me go back.
So the prosecutor, he has an interest, right, in wanting these prosecutions to happen in his court. He's built up this case. This is his thing. But he doesn't have unlimited power. His power is checked by the judicial by the judges.
I guess I would just say, number one, I think that even if one were to view Luis Moreno Ocampo in a positive light, it's probably less than judicious behavior to denounce a process as soon as it's announced. Even if it just shows a certain especially if he's not. I guess you're saying if he's not the one to make the decision, he's free to do whatever he wants.
Federal prosecutors here in the U.S. sort of if they lose a case and on appeal they'll sort of complain and rail against it. It's sort of like
you can do anything you want in writing. It just seemed very strange to before anything was said. And here's another. It is emerged, and this will have to be unsourced. But and I think he's bragged about it. That Luis Moreno Ocampo, before making the official request for the arrest warrant, showed his evidence to, if not Bashir personally, to Bashir's people. And
he said this. I've never heard of
he engaged in his own negotiations. He said, if you do X, Y, and Z, I won't seek an arrest warrant against you. And Bashir obviously didn't dissatisfy him, and so he sought the arrest warrant. But the question then becomes, one thing that Gareth Evans said yesterday is that the beautiful thing about the International Criminal Court is it's non-political. Well, you're saying it's political, but he's saying this guy just as Moreno Ocampo, every time he comes here, he says, I'm just the prosecutor. I follow the evidence. It's not for me to make these big decisions about, trading off or plea bargaining. But in fact, it's not true. In fact, the guy himself very much negotiated in that way. And the question, I think, becomes, that's a lot of power. That's a lot of power for one guy to have.
Like prosecutors have power in general. They let people plea bargain. I guess the point I make about whether it's political or whether it's not political, I think like the process of the court is strictly legal. And so in that sense, sort of Ocampo's claim that he's just a prosecutor following the evidence. There's some truth to that. It becomes sort of less than a strictly legal apparatus when you sort of take a couple steps back and look at sort of what other countries can do through the ICC to other countries. And I think the example being Sudan. So right now it's a political body in the sense that members of the Security Council are using it to gain leverage over Bashir. It's not sort of a political body in the sense that the prosecutor has a set of rules he must follow, and those are strictly sort of legal.
But again,
does my distinction make sense at all?
Right? No, it does, and I think all it is. I don't want to have to once again say something that we previously said here, which is that there are those who doubt the competence and demeanor and even character of Moreno Ocampo.
Right. We talked about that.
We have.
Do you want to? I don't mean to cut you off.
We can move on. We can move on.
You want to talk about Myanmar? Because last time.
Oh, sure.
We left it. I was waiting with.
And I'm going to talk about North Korea. I'll beat the red meat drum. Finally, after a lengthy 3-week silence, the UN's envoy to Myanmar, the Ban Ki-moon's good offices player, Ibrahim Gambari, former Nigerian diplomat, general man about the world, went to Myanmar a month ago with the goal of meeting with both Aung San Suu Kyi, the noted Nobel Prize-winning democracy leader under house arrest in Yangon, and with General Tan Shui, the noted strongman leading the country from a jungle-bound capital. He accomplished neither. He did neither met with Aung San Suu Kyi or Tan Shui. Pretty much it became clear through Aung San Suu Kyi's party, the National League of Democracy, NLD, that she rebuffed him, that she declined. It was not the government that said, and the government actually bragged that they did everything possible to make the visit possible. She chose not to meet with Gambari. So questions arose as soon as he left. He actually stayed an extra day, and there's this very heart-wrenching footage of Gambari's staff, some of whom I know and are very nice people, standing outside Aung San Suu Kyi's house with a bullhorn, saying, "Please come out," and she did not.
And that's where we left it last time.
Okay, good. That's the setup.
And the UN receiver of Gambari, the process, I guess, received some criticism. You can't. The sort of envoy process has been stalled, and we were waiting to see sort of what came next. And Gambari was going to present to the Security Council sort of his findings, what he thinks the UN should do next, and
he did. He finally did. After 3 weeks of silence from both him and Ban Ki-moon about whether the trip was useful.
What did Gambari?
Well, number one, let's say this: another UN classic. His briefing to the Council was behind closed doors.
I thought so.
Of course, afterwards we sort of pick up the pieces, as probably could have been predicted. The UK, France, and the US said they're very disappointed. Very disappointed. Not with Gambari. Everyone wants to praise Gambari, but with the generals, the military regimes sort of thumbing their nose. And what many people, the theory on that side is that in a way the UN is almost enabling a scam election, that by going and pretending, it's blessing a constitution that was passed right after the cyclone, a constitution that it was illegal to campaign against, and that will enshrine military rule in Myanmar for decades to come with the veneer of legitimacy. On the other hand, and this is, I spoke on the record with the ambassador of Indonesia, who said, hey, there's a lot of people that want to just paint it as a useless trip, but of the 5 points he had to accomplish, he accomplished 2. I have a very hard time figuring out what the 2 are. I'm told by somebody he accomplished none. But the idea, I guess the idea is they were willing to, in a way, the one that they showed willingness on was opening up to the UN, as if that's, and let me go on the right wing now, as if that's a good in itself. I mean, maybe it could lead to good, but the one thing they said is, for example, on Gambari's next trip, his staffers can come in even before he does with visas and prepare the ground. And this is viewed as a step in the right direction. This is counted as a big win for the trip. But the question is, it gets a little circular. Like, the accomplishment of this trip is more trips. But if on the other hand, the theory is that the trips are just buying time to enshrine military rule forever, what's the point? All right. So there are clearly two. It seems I spoke to a well-placed, highly well-placed, high in the building UN diplomat, UN mediator, whatever you want to call him, official, who said that in reality, the only leverage the UN has over Myanmar are the trips. The generals want the trips for obvious reasons, because they do provide some legitimacy, and because, in fact, ironically, according to this highly placed official, both China and India, who make mucho dinero in Myanmar, like the trips, because it provides a level of normality.
It
gives cover. It gives ground cover. It's okay to do natural gas fields with Tan Shui because Gambari was just there 2 months ago. There's a process, right? Everyone said, don't call it a failure. It's a process. And so by going, and so in a way, this UN person I thought was a very, whether you agree with it or not, he was saying the leverage, even if it's for sleazy reasons, they want the trips. And so what we need,
and so I guess the flip side of that, we talked a little bit last time is that I guess the trade-off we talked about was between human rights and sort of humanitarianism, that the UN still operates a lot of provides a lot of relief from the cyclone victims, and if Gambari were suddenly to declare forget these guys, that those relief workers might also get kicked out. So it's a difficult situation, but again, I think like a lot of situations, it requires pressure being applied not by UN officials but by member states, those that actually wield real power over the situation.
I actually heard even more recently. I think before the last time we spoke, I told you that an ASEAN ambassador had said to me Gambari was on his last legs of the mandate, was in fact going to be replaced, and that was one of the reasons that Aung San Suu Kyi said, why should I meet with a lame duck?
Yeah.
I'm now told that it came very close to happening, but in fact, and this is the weird thing, where you have these guys, these UN envoys, like someone like a Gambari, he's very well known, I mean, he's been an ambassador here for decades, he knows all the players. Yeah. He wants to keep that job. That's pretty clear. I mean, I feel bad for him. I like him. He's a nice person. He has a very tough job. There's no question. I mean, I don't say that to suck up to him. I'm just saying it's kind of a thankless task, but there are some tasks you shouldn't have. If you're being used to support a dictatorship, you should just say, I'm not going to do it anymore. But he wants to keep that job, and therefore he has his own, apparently, kind of almost negotiations with the regional power players who could, by whispering in Ban Ki-moon's ear, get him replaced. And if they can live with his approach, then he lives on as the envoy. Maybe that's how all diplomacy works, but it's very murky. I mean, I get all the time now from the opposition parties saying, they're obviously outraged. Maybe they're being kind of naive. Maybe they're being. I mean, the problem is, it's like how do you solve this problem? But going, maybe what they're going to try to do is to use the next trip. There's some talk of Ban Ki-moon going to Myanmar in December. He will be in the region. Gambari was quoted while he was there by the opposition parties as saying, Ban's coming in December. Probably it's a very bad idea for him to just say, I'm coming in December. If that's what the high official said to me, is that they should use either the next Gambari trip or certainly a Ban trip. He will only come if Aung San Suu Kyi is released and all restrictions released. It becomes very personalized, but that would be, then the UN could say, look, this is a feather in our hat. The lady is out and about. The only problem is that they've released her in the past and then re-imprisoned her. You know what I mean? So it's kind of, but then at least, I have to say this, and you can call me a cynic if you want. You were saying that the UN's motives is to be nice so they can keep giving aid to the cyclone.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying there are sort of multiple competing motives, and that's certainly one of them.
I think one of I sense, and I really do, that another, not the major motive either, I agree, it's all mixed. Part of it is just like the UN wanting to be relevant. In fact, it gets even greasier than that. You have, and not to put down Gambari, you have these guys, these individuals, all of them are mediators, whether it was Van Walsum in Western Sahara, Rod Larson in Lebanon, they all have their own game going on, right? To end a mandate in failure is not helpful for the next gig. And so it's kind of, they're kind of doing their own.
Is in his 70s, he's right. There's
you'd be surprised. He's got his eye on the prize, including Nigeria, by the way.
Really?
All right.
Nigeria
Really?
Well, would his successor fit? I think probably already. I'm talking completely out of my element here, but I would assume that he has a reputation in Nigeria already, regardless of what happens.
No, he's some view him as extremely popular there. The only thing is he recently went and tried to become the mediator for the Niger Delta dispute, and the rebels said
that can't be a good career move.
The rebels said, "Get the hell out. We don't trust you. You were a Sonny Abacha ambassador." Again. Here, we're going to go even further. It's funny. Maybe it's this Asian thing that brings out the
take us farther.
Let's go. Let's go deeper into the heart of tyranny. Ready? And it's weird. On this one, I'm as one with the right wing, and it has to do. Maybe I'm not. I'll just say this. I attended, since we last spoke, the executive board meeting of the UN Development Program, UNDP. They meet a couple times a year. It's like a full week. No press covers it, believe it or not, strangely, for whatever reason, despite the hype around this. Yeah. Among other things they discussed was the return to North Korea, return to Pyongyang. And I have to say, in fairness, that the vast majority of their executive board is in favor of returning. In fact, the speeches that were given were, why did we ever leave? You know, it was all hype. Why did UNDP pull out just based on some evidence from a whistleblower in the U.S. mission without consulting us? Even though, and it seems like, I have to say, it seems like many of the member states didn't really read the reports, because the reports said there was no way to track how the money was spent. They may also have said as much money wasn't spent as the U.S. mission said, or whatever. I'm certainly not saying this for the U.S. mission. And in fact, the U.S. mission has totally backed down on this. I have to say this. They were getting their ass handed to them in this meeting, and they said nothing. I mean, it was really striking. I asked Khalil that, and he said, we have concerns. But their actual representation down in the room was just, it was laughable. They were like, we think that the UNDP roadmap for return to Pyongyang is a good thing. Here's the thing I think maybe we can agree on, which is this. Yeah. One, this was a big move. It's a big move to say. Maybe it's, I mean, I don't want to overhype it up. But they did this whole discussion as, quote, an informal consultation. I stayed in the room. Nobody told me to leave, but I was later told, oh, this was a consultation. And there was no recording made of it. I've since asked UNDP, can I have a copy of what their regional director for Asia, Mr. Chibber, said is the roadmap for the return to North Korea? No. You should get the tape. But you can't get the tape because it was a closed meeting. So it's kind of like taking place. I guess they know it's controversial, so I guess I'm just saying, if they're going to make the decision, make it openly. And here's a related point, and then I'm very sorry. This really had me frothing. There was a related discussion about making UNDP audits available to member states. This was a whole thing in North Korea. That's where the whole thing started when the U.S. mission asked UNDP for audits of North Korea, and UNDP said no. And then the U.S. made a big stink. This was definitely started under Bolton. When they got them, the audit said there's a lot of problems, and things went from there. Kamal Dervish, the head of UNDP, promised, as did Ad Melkert, that they would reform the system and make it so that in the future, member states who asked to see an audit could see it. Maybe they'd have to keep it confidential and not give it to the press, but they could see it. That's no longer going to happen. The discussion at the executive board meeting was that before any request for an audit is filled, the executive board should have to hear it. Maybe the executive board should even have to vote on it. Which means basically that in the name of sort of like screw the U.S. trying to politicize development aid, the entire program becomes totally untransparent. And even the people that give the money aren't allowed to see an audit of how it's spent. What do you think of that, Mark?
I'm curious about the point you made about sort of the U.S. sort of laying low during this meeting. Do you think that has anything to do with sort of the détente between sort of North Korea and the United States that sort of no longer is the United States in these kind of international forums trying to push, you know, maximalist anti-North Korea positions, that now, you know, we have all of a sudden a new, more sort of conciliatory attitude and relationship with North Korea? This is all, you know, clearly, you know, this is not, you know, well, I just wonder if it's part of the warming of relations that the U.S. maybe feels it's not in its interests to make a big stink about this because it has sort of bigger fish to fry with North Korea.
Number one, if that's true, then I think I lose even more respect for my own country, because their point about the lack of accountability and how money was spent remains the same. And so I know some of the people that worked on that quote campaign of the U.S. mission, some that didn't, but some were real true believers. It wasn't like, we're going to audit you because we want you to stop nukes. You see what I mean? And number two, they're not stopping nukes, as you've seen. Not that that's, but I will just lay all my cards on the table. My beef with, not to have a beef or not, but this, I want to explain to you why the basis of a problem with North Korea is that it's a totally dictatorial country. The people that try to leave are beaten physically for trying to leave the country, right? Mm-hmm. There's no freedom. I mean, if you're a human rights activist, I think it's I find it difficult for people to be like, you know, it's great, North Korea has prevailed, send us the money, you know?
Yeah.
Unless there's some indication of how the money is going to be spent. I don't know. So that's an aside.
I guess
Go ahead.
It was a dictatorial, country that under sort of a really frosty relations with the United States,
mm-hmm.
and the brink of war with the United States remained a dictatorial country.
Well, if you have nukes, you're allowed to.
Maybe it's sort of daytime. I'm sorry.
No, if you have nukes, it erases the multitude of sins. I think that there are countries, we've had this, there are countries on Earth whose human rights records are being criticized much more loudly, apparently because they don't have nukes. Because if you have nukes, then that becomes the main issue.
If you have nukes and you're a country like the United States, your main goal is to remove the nukes from those countries, right?
And it's being really successful, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, there's some, you've seen that. I think since we last spoke, Kim Jong-un was back, by all accounts. By all accounts,
oh, really? Okay.
He's brushing his teeth.
I saw the headline saying that he had mysteriously disappeared and or might be dead.
Yeah, that was being said. People said it was the heart. Now they're saying it was the brain, but he's gotten over it and he's brushing his teeth. Nobody knows how hard he's brushing them. But there was the real scuttlebutt here was why did they... it was while he was somewhat incapacitated that the program re-began. But the program has re-begun. But I want to go back, because you're a UN, what do you, I guess I want to ask you is, totally outside of what you think of John Bolton or the U.S.'s approach to North Korea, should the UN, as a matter of course, provide copies of audits of how money is spent, at least to the people that gave the money?
So to the executive board?
To member states. Donors. I think they should give it to the public. I'll say that. It's the UN. I mean, I think it's unbelievable that financial information,
other security concerns that might complicate things. I don't know. Honestly, like you're deep in the weeds in this, and I'm not.
No, but I'm going to disagree with you on that. I think because we come back around all the time to is it unfair to say that the UN is corrupt or whatever? And I just think if the most basic forms of disclosure that even in Wasilla, Alaska, exist, what's the problem with? I don't think it's a minor issue.
Yeah, you've brought it full circle.
Okay, I did. I tried. You saw that? Pretty
artful,
good.
Right? That was really good.
All right. That's what they pay me the big money for. So
have a great summit meeting.
Oh, it's going to be the general debate.
Say hi to Ahmadinejad for me.
Sarkozy, they're all coming through.
Yeah. And I will see you.
Okay. There should be more. Yeah, there should be more. You've 3 times in this accused me of being in the weeds. So hopefully I'll be up with the big sunflowers.
Listen, that's not a bad thing. Being in the weeds. We need folks in there. To help us.
All right.
Separate and understand these things. So thank you, Matthew. I'll talk to you later.